number of appearances on Cross Question. I've just made that up. I think it's probably true. And Matt Warman's not far behind him. He's Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness and former Culture Minister. They're here to answer your questions. We do actually have a full switchboard, but do keep trying. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 and say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's Anthony in Blackpool. Anthony, hi.
Hi. Hello, Iain. I fail to understand why a display of petulance over parliamentary procedure should override the vital need to address the suffering of people in Gaza. That seems to be become the main story rather than the vital need. So,
who's been petulant?
All of the damn people in Westminster, as far as I can see. Including the Speaker? I think, actually, he was trying to be even-handed, personally. I think the people who walked out in response to his position were the petulant people I'm talking about, I suppose.
OK. Barry Gardiner, let's start with you. Were people being petulant today?
Look, most people come into Parliament wanting to do good, wanting to serve their community. Today, I felt soiled by the whole thing. Anthony, the answer to your question is it shouldn't override it. The most important thing that we were supposed to be discussing today was those children in Gaza, those people in Gaza, and also those people in Israel who have their loved ones as hostages, which is just insufferable. And we should have been discussing how we move to an immediate ceasefire. And I think it's... I do believe that the Speaker genuinely wanted to try and let everybody have their say. But that's... The trouble is, when you think you know what people are going to do and you don't follow the rules, then sometimes you make a mistake. And I think that's what the Speaker did today. And I feel sorry for him because he's a really genuinely good man who was trying to let everybody have their own say on what they felt the situation was. But
which is, there are two versions of events here, aren't there? Lindsay Hoyle, when he stood up and made his apology about an hour ago, that's what he said. He said, my priority is to keep MPs safe, and I thought I was doing the right thing by letting everyone have their say.
Yeah.
Nick Watt from Newsnight is reporting that he was put under pressure by senior Labour figures, possibly including Keir Starmer. He said, well, if you don't allow our amendment, now the government to put down one as well, don't expect to be Speaker under a Labour government. Now, I have no idea whether, but that, I mean, that's the allegation. Lindsay Hoyle has denied that. He did it on the floor of the House of Commons. But that is becoming quite a big story.
Well, if that were true, it would be abhorrent, of course. I take the Speaker at his word when he says that wasn't the case. But the way in which the procedure is ordered normally on an opposition day is rather counterintuitive. Normally you think that you take an amendment before you would take the substantive motion. But actually, because it's an opposition day and parliamentary procedure wants to allow the opposition to have their day in the sun, their say on the matter, it's normal that the opposition day motion gets heard before the amendment. But because there were two amendments today, that was reversed, and it meant that the Labour amendment would be heard first. And if, as everybody expected, the Conservatives had voted against the Labour amendment, then the SNP amendment would have been heard. And the Conservatives then decided they would withdraw their amendment And that meant that the Labour amendment would then succeed.
Are you with me at the back?
Exactly. Anthony, the short answer to your question is it was a complete mess, and it should never have happened in that way. And as I say, I just feel soiled by the whole thing.
Matt Warman, the SNP have a right to feel aggrieved, don't they?
Yeah, they absolutely do. So look, I think I've been a MP for 8 and a bit years, throughout the whole Brexit period, throughout some pretty excruciating scenes, and today was as bad as it has ever been. And it was bad for two reasons. The first is that we allowed partisan politics to obscure the horrific events that are going on in Gaza. And you can criticise the SNP for trying to box Labour in through their motion in the first place. You can criticise Labour for trying to get out of it. Whatever happens, partisan politics obscure.
You can criticise the Conservatives for putting down their own motion
and
as well.
And you can also criticise the Conservatives. That is a huge problem, that obscuring of that important issue. But the other thing that happened that is also hugely important is a huge chunk of Parliament wondered why the Speaker had behaved in the way he did, and they doubted that he was an honest broker. And that, for anyone living in the UK, having faith in the standards that govern our democracy matters. And if you say that that the Speaker is at serious risk of allegation that he has made the Labour Party's life easier, or that he has, perhaps more seriously, put the SNP in a position where, when they control the order paper for their opposition day, it's become a Labour opposition day, that is a big constitutional issue.
Does that imply that you've lost confidence in the Speaker?
The House, when I was sat in it, certainly, in my judgment, did not have confidence in the Speaker. When he came back to the chair after a lot of demands to summon him back to the chair, I don't think he helped matters, and I can't see a way that he can recover the confidence of the SNP and of a huge chunk of the Conservative Party.
And you include yourself in that chunk of the Conservative Party, by the sounds of it, so you think he should go?
I think, as things stand right now, his position is untenable.
That's quite something for you to say, because there was one MP, I think, shouted something at him about that he didn't like, and this MP on the Conservative benches was told by Keir Starmer by Lindsay Hoyle to withdraw it. And I'm thinking, well, that MP isn't going to ever get called again. And the fact that you've now said on this programme that you think he should go, if he hears about that, you might not get called very regularly.
I'm not sure I'm his biggest problem right now, but I...
well, you're a problem.
It speaks volumes about Lindsay that actually I have no doubt that he will, knowing what I think or not having heard what I think, I have no doubt that he would still treat me just the same as he would treat any other MP trying to get called or trying to speak or whatever it might be.
Okay. Just for the point of clarity, you still have confidence in Lindsay Hoyle, Barry Gardiner?
I think he's a really decent man, and I think he tried to do his best, but he made a mistake. He then came back to the House and apologised for it. I hope that we won't be so inward-looking that we just keep on focusing on our own belly button, but get on and look out at what's happening in the world and try and do something about it.
Trevor Phillips, you've been around as long as I have watching procedures in the House of Commons. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Nope. And I hope sometime during this evening, Iain, you'll explain why you ever wanted to be in that place.
Well, I kind of grown out of it.
Look, I think, some of this is obviously accident. I don't think anybody this morning thought this was going to happen tonight. But I think that there's an underlying issue, and there's an outstanding question which my parliamentary colleagues might be able to answer. I think that there's a basic problem here, which is that it became clear that everybody who was active here, all the players, as the Speaker described them, were more interested in party advantage than they were in the substantive issue. And that, I think, is what the public's going to take away. And I think, frankly, if I were not a polite person who has to deal with parliamentarians everywhere, every week, I'd say that's an absolute effing disgrace. So that's one point. Second point, I think, is what we're seeing here, and on our programme on Sunday morning, Rachel Johnson, your colleague here, made a very, very important point. I asked her what she thought the election campaign is going to be like, and she said, nasty, brutish and long. And I think we're seeing the first emanations of that today. The one thing which I was very surprised, and I'm puzzled by, I don't quite understand it. When the Speaker made his comment, he talked about the safety of MPs. And I'm trying to work out what it is that's going on here. What is it that made him
Because
worry
there are
about
many
safety?
MPs, and I think particularly Labour MPs, who are being threatened by pro-Palestinian constituents because they haven't voted or spoken out in favour of a ceasefire, and they are coming under huge threats. And they fear for their families, and it is part of the Speaker's remit to try to protect MPs as much as possible.
Well, if that is the case, and maybe I'm overstepping the mark here, but if he genuinely believed that members of the House of Commons were having their votes essentially decided or influenced by fear of harm, then he should not have allowed the debate to take place. You cannot have this kind of chicanery as an answer to intimidation. I mean, if that's the real truth of what made him decide what he was going to do, I think he should have said very early today.
Let's ask our two colleagues here. Am I right?
Situation.
Was I right in what I said just then?
Yes, you were. A number of colleagues have experienced intimidation. I think probably, the Speaker realised that if people could not have a vote to express exactly what their position was, then that would be a problem for certain people.
Well, that is the biggest thing coming out of today. If our representatives cannot vote according to their conscience, that, to me, dwarfs all the parliamentary chicanery.
That wasn't the issue.
It dwarfs all of the other issues. That's the big issue today.
It wasn't that they couldn't. I don't know anyone who has been subject to that sort of pressure who would not vote with their conscience.
Well, then why did he choose to change the procedure?
Because he wanted them to be able to express their view, to say what their genuine view was completely. And if they had not been able to vote on all of the motions, then all of them would not have been able to do that. That was, I think, his thinking.
Let's hear from Nimco, because, I mean, you've got a unique position here because you're not sort of politically aligned. You're an observer, a bit like Trevor. I mean, you're not an active participant, but you've been around politics for a long time, whereas Nimco, you're sort of comparatively new to it all. What did you make of today's event?
I can honestly say that I haven't really watched. I've just been seeing it through the galley and having these kind of conversations. So I think it's going to be quite confusing, not just for the general public, but I think on a global stage. I think it was
the number one item on the German Tagesschau news program.
See, this is what I mean. I think it's going to be an issue on an international stage. I think the problem is that the US is kind of consumed with this kind of, is Trump going to come back? Is he going to be the next president? Blah blah blah. And then we've got a general election coming up here, and then we're seeing our democracy shown to the world like this. So I think it's more of it is an issue about democracy. I can't really say much about it because I think a lot of my generation are not necessarily going to be as engaged in terms of the turmoil, but I think they're going to be interested in the conversation. I want to come back to what Trevor was saying around the whole issue of safety of MPs. I think that's a real issue, especially with an election coming up. I don't necessarily think that the Speaker chose this standpoint or whatever he did in order to say that these people were being held hostage on their conscience and whether they were able to vote. But I think that there is an opportunity for them to say what they said or what they wanted to say, so at least they can speak to the constituency. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of blackmail and there's a lot of issues that is facing MPs, and I think that's one of the things that we have to really talk about. But I think in this whole broader context, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and nor have I been around in politics as much as you guys, so I really can't say much on that.
Be thankful for that. Somebody says here, the people have freedom. You, behind studio walls, are guilty of all crimes. I plead guilty as charged, I suppose. I mean, what on earth is that supposed to mean? Right, we have lots and lots of questions coming into the programme. One line free, 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
LB.
We have with us in the studio broadcaster Trevor Phillips, Nimco Ali, anti-FGM campaigner, Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North, and Matt Warman, Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness. Moshe is in Salford. Hello, Moshe.
Hi.
Hello, what would you like to say?
Hi. My question is that instead of this stupid call for ceasefire, which is not really a ceasefire, it's actually asking Israel to surrender. And instead of that, which will not make any difference for one person in the whole of UK, for the whole of Middle East, they should put sanctions on Qatar and Iran, one, and two, take in refugees from Gaza.
Trevor Phillips.
I've got a little bit of sympathy with your exasperation, but I think in reality, the idea of ceasefire, of course, is what everybody wants. It's never going to happen because it's got to be mutually observed. And part of the problem here is that you have a state, Israel, against what we technically call a non-state actor, and Hamas, which doesn't have to sign up to anything like this. However, what I think is very important about what the callers just said is, let us not forget who is really driving this: Iran.
Yep.
And the Iranians, most of all, simply want chaos, and they are meddling there, and they are, by the way, meddling here. And I think we all need, in all of the excitement of what's going on here, just to remind ourselves, number one, how this started, October the 7th, 1,400 people, the most ghastly atrocities. Of course, lots of people, and of course, a lot of people have died since then. But the context is that in Tehran, they're having a wonderful time because they're making chaos across the Middle East.
Why is it in their interest to do that?
They want to keep... remember what happened, what the date... just to be specific about it, October the 7th happened shortly before what's described as the Abraham Accords were due to be signed, which was essentially the beginnings of I wouldn't call it a peace process, but a warming of relations between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states. The Iranians hate that possibility, and there is absolutely no question that one of the reasons for the timing of this was to kill the Abraham Accords. And of course, what concretely happened was Biden, who was supposed to go and essentially wrap this up, didn't go. And the Abraham Accords have effectively died for the time being. So the Iranians want to make sure that there is not peace in that region so that they can keep everybody unbalanced, and they think that that is always going to be to their advantage. Now, it may not always be, but at the moment, it is.
I was going to say, can we also remember that the Iranians are committing crimes against humanity against their own people? So against this backdrop of us focusing on Gaza and what's happening in Israel, they're murdering peace activists, they're murdering women who just want to choose to live in a civilized society. So I think that's also another benefit to Iran keeping this going, is the fact that the world has turned a blind eye to the atrocities that they're committing. And this is one of the things where a lot of the Iranian civil rights movements are on the streets every day, with the Israelis understanding that they both have a common enemy.
Just let me interrupt this a moment, because the SNP have issued a statement from their Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn. It's not that long, so let me read it to you. Today's shameful events show Westminster is utterly broken. This should have been the chance for the UK Parliament to do the right thing and vote for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Israel. Instead, it turned into a Westminster circus. It's a disgrace that Sir Keir Starmer and the Speaker colluded to block Parliament voting on the SNP motion for an immediate ceasefire and against the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. More than 29,000 Palestinian children, women and men have been killed, and huge swathes of Gaza have been obliterated while Westminster equivocates. People in Gaza and Israel and voters in Scotland have been badly let down. They deserve so much better than this. The SNP will continue to press the UK government and Parliament to back an immediate ceasefire. The time for equivocation is over. Barry Gardiner, I don't know if you want to make a brief comment on that, but let's go to Moshe's question as well.
Sure. Look, I understand the anger that Stephen Flynn and the SNP are feeling. This was supposed to be their day to put forward their motion. They, in the end, were denied the opportunity to do that. He's wrong in one sense, and that is that Parliament did actually take a vote, and they did vote for an immediate ceasefire.
Let's put through on the nod.
That is contentious in itself, Barry. Come on.
There was no vote.
No. Sorry. What happens at the end of a debate is that the speaker or deputy speaker in this case calls, all the ayes, and the noes, and she called that, and there were no noes.
Well, that's not true, Barry. She called it. There is huge anger across the House that call was made when there were obviously contradictory voices.
You see, the Conservatives...
That is in the prerogative of the Speaker. I'm not saying it isn't, but there is real anger about your interpretation of events.
I was there, I listened to it all, and there was a hubbub. There was an absolute hubbub, but all the voices were saying aye, and the Conservatives had said they were taking no further part in the proceedings, and the SNP did not call no. Now, it was their prerogative to do that. They didn't do it, as far as I could make out at the time, and I'm genuinely trying to be...
All right, well, let's get back to Moshe's question.
Yeah, exactly. On Moshe's question, Moshe, I agree with you that there should be tougher sanctions against Iran. I think Iran is the real problem in the area here. I don't agree with you that there's no point in a ceasefire, or when you said that a ceasefire was simply asking Israel to surrender. That's not the case. A ceasefire is on both sides. It's both sides that must put down their arms.
I think his point was it's pointless for British political parties to call for it.
Look, and there I do have some sympathy, because it's clear that whatever the opposition parties in Britain say is not going to fundamentally influence events on the ground. I think Moshe's absolutely right there. But at the same time, our constituents all want to know where we stand. They want to know what we believe about this issue because they see it every night on their television. They're appalled by the suffering that's going on, and they're concerned about the way in which children and innocent people are being killed. And that has to be taken into account. And Parliament is there to show that, to express that, and to let people know what their representatives believe about it. So I think in that sense it has a purpose, although I agree with you, it will probably not make any practical difference to what happens in Palestine and Israel.
Matt?
I think to answer the question directly, the government should be doing whatever works. And I don't think calling for a ceasefire is anywhere near as effective as the sort of measures that Moshe talks about and others. So I think it should be a focus on not symbolic calls in Parliament. It should be on tangible action that the UK government can take. Now, our role in this is relatively limited, but it is not nothing.
I agree with what's been said about Iran, but I think Moshe's point was also, as I said, that these calls for a ceasefire are pointless, and they might have provoked the end of the speaker's career. Who knows what other consequences there might be? But do you two, as the politicians on the panel, do your constituents sort of harangue you about this subject, or is it really? I mean, we talk about it a lot in the media, but I just wonder how much it is a really big issue in your constituents. I mean, you have very different constituencies, obviously. Barry?
I have had thousands of my constituents email me and write to me about this, and many of them have done so repeatedly since October the 7th, and that is on all sides. My Jewish constituents, I have in my constituency the largest Jewish school in the whole of Europe, JFS, and it's equally amongst the Muslim constituents in my patch. And it's not, they don't always think the way you think they might. But what they all want is to know what I think and what I will do. And that's why when I set out a letter, which I sent equally to people, no matter which side they took in the conflict, I said, these are the principles upon which I will act and take decisions. And I set those out because it's not a matter of taking sides. You have to work here on the basis of principles.
And Matt?
So I've absolutely had emails on it, but we're probably talking very low hundreds, if that, from people who are concerned. In practical terms, I've had a small pro-Palestinian demonstration in the middle of Boston. I've got a small Muslim population and a very small Jewish population. So it is absolutely an issue, but I do think it's not going to change the fact that I suspect Barry as well gets far more emails on the economy and the NHS and potholes and all of those issues. So I think you shouldn't be.
I don't think he does.
Not on potholes.
I think Barry
No potholes in Brent.
I think it's really
no potholes. But my point being that it is. I don't think it's Parliament's job to say we should talk most about the things we get the most emails about. This is a hugely important issue, and we have to have some.
Otherwise, it would be animal welfare every day.
Indeed. But we should also not lose sight of the fact that constituents do want to see us talking about, certainly not ourselves, and also issues that are more on their doorstep as well.
Just a quick point. I mean, I know Barry's constituency very well and spent many years reporting from it, and it is. I think Brent North is probably now what they would call the most diverse constituency, probably
183 different languages
in the country.
spoken around our dinner
Even more
tables.
than Tunbridge Wells.
Even more than Tunbridge Wells. And so, I don't often say this, but I have some sympathy for Barry in the situation that he's in, because this conflict is felt very, very strongly amongst the different communities in that constituency and in that borough. And I think what's interesting or important about this is that this is a very unfamiliar kind of situation for British politics. We know about class politics, we know about, workers and all of that, but this kind of really strongly, sincerely held identity connection is a very unfamiliar situation for us, but one that we're going to have to learn to deal with, because I think, for example, Nimco's had to deal with a lot of it, both in your own life and in your own work, and I think our politics hasn't really quite got to grips with how to deal with what feels like, to be frank, unreasonable behaviour from lots of different groups of people. But from their point of view, it isn't unreasonable. It's what they're about. It's their identity, it's their soul.
Exactly.
Right, let's move on to some different subjects after the news. It's 8:33, news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
More than 30 MPs are calling for the Speaker of the House of Commons to step down following his handling of the Gaza ceasefire vote. Leader of the backbench 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, is among those who've tabled a motion of no confidence. Sir Lindsay Hoyle has apologised, saying his approach was with the best intentions. Also tonight, a former Metropolitan Police officer from southwest London has been told to expect a long prison sentence for several sex attacks. The Met says it sacked 24-year-old Cliff Mitchell at the earliest opportunity. LBC weather: further rain and drizzle in southern England and Wales tonight, heavier in the northwest, a low of 2. Rain moving south tomorrow, followed by sunshine and blustery showers, a high of 10.
LBC
8:36 with us on Cross Question, the broadcaster Trevor Phillips, Nimco Ali, social activist, chief executive of the Five Foundation, Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North, and Matt Warman, Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness. Our next caller is Phil in Penrith. Hello, Phil.
How are you doing, mate?
I'm not doing too badly, thank you, Phil. What would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask the gentleman, please, ladies and gentlemen.
And lady.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
How close do they think we might be, to going to war in this country? Boots on the ground, British troops war. I was born and raised under I'm 80, and I was born and raised under the shadow of nuclear weapons, and I've got that same Cold War feeling now about the way things are in the world.
Now, Phil's question comes as the Defence Secretary has to say he has absolute confidence in Britain's nuclear deterrent after an attempt to test fire a missile from a Royal Navy submarine failed for the second time. The previous test was in 2016. The head of the army made a speech a few weeks ago essentially saying that we were a pre-war generation, which was quite chilling in many ways. Matt Warman.
I think we're certainly closer than we have been in my adult lifetime. And in a sense, that's a statement of the obvious. We have got war in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. We've got what's going on in Israel and Gaza and the risk of that infecting the wider region. And we've got the constant tensions between China and Taiwan. So I think, and that hasn't really scratched the surface of the sort of global potential for conflict. So I think far closer than we have been for a long time. I think that's why you're going to see defence as an issue in this election campaign in a way that perhaps it hasn't been, partly because of the sort of interventions that you've just talked about. But I do think what to me that says is that's why we have to bear in mind post-Second World War we invented a series of institutions designed to preserve global peace. And there is a risk that inadvertently or otherwise the undermining of those institutions pushes us closer to a conflict when we are now at least equipped with organisations that could try and stave it off.
Nimco.
I think I'm the only person that on the panel that has actually seen war in real life. So I was there when Somalia and Somaliland went to war and I was a child. So I think the romanticization of war is something that we have to get away from. I don't think we're necessarily close to war. So we have to remember any kind of war that the UK have been involved in has been, as I won't necessarily say aggressive, but more of the invading force. So whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, in those kind of contexts, I think the key thing that we've lost is the art of diplomacy. I think having been someone who has always respected the United Nations and respected our kind of leadership in the sense that the UK was always around the table, I think that's something that we've kind of lost. I don't think we're necessarily going towards war, but we are losing the ability to be able to prevent a lot of wars breaking out. And I know we're talking about Europe, I know we're talking about Ukraine, and we're talking about Gaza, but we have to be conscious about the fact that there's a massive war going on in Sudan. The DRC is about to go into war. Ethiopia was at war for the last 2.5 years. And those are specific regions in the world where the G7 and the Permanent Security Council members would have normally come together and actually done something about. So I think the reason why we are unstable is to do with the egotistical way that we've been leading in the last 4 or 5 years. So in short, I don't think we're going to be at war, but I think we need to be able to focus and invest more on democracy and the diplomacy. And I think I'm hoping that will be more of the election conversation rather than actually going towards the US angle of seeking to invest more in defence when we should be investing more in diplomacy.
Trevor.
Well, first of all, if it's of any reassurance, I too grew up under the shadow of the Cold War, and it's worth remembering we didn't go to war. The actual, mutually assured destruction actually worked. In fact, deterrence worked. On the question about now, I too haven't been at war, but I've reported a lot of war. Balkans, Lebanon, Mozambique, and it is a horrid, nasty business. I think the danger of most conflict now is not, we're not going to go to war with France. I think it's very unlikely, actually, that we would be involved in a hot war with Russia. But wars between small states and wars with what I referred to earlier on as non-state actors are way more frequent and actually much, much more vicious. And the other thing, which I think is probably the biggest threat across the world now, is the use of famine and the climate change to suppress and to attack other nations, which is something that's happening quite a lot in Africa. Migration the war is going to be an unfamiliar kind of thing, it's being prosecuted in an unusual way. So I don't think we're going to be boots on the ground, but I think we will face conflicts that are very unfamiliar, very nasty.
Barry?
Yeah, Phil, you said you're in your 80s, so that means you were born during the Second World War, and no doubt have very vivid childhood stories that come from that. I agree with Trevor. I don't think we'll have boots on the ground yet. I don't, even though we have a war in Europe with Russia and Ukraine, I don't see that happening in the near future. And I also think that boots on the ground is the old-fashioned warfare. Cyber warfare is much more likely these days. Attacking other countries' infrastructure through cyberspace is the way of degrading their capabilities, degrading their infrastructure, making sure that they lose their energy. Just look at what Putin's done in terms of energy into Western Europe and how that has been weaponized and the impact that's had on a country like Germany. So I think there are different ways in which warfare in the medium term will be prosecuted, but I actually think in the long term it will get very brutal indeed if we allow climate change to get out of control. And that is because there will be a change in land use, there will be desertification, there already is. In Africa, there are communities that used to be agrarian communities that can now no longer feed themselves. And when that happens, people move. And when they move, we see what that causes. It causes resentment from the people whose land they want to move into. And so the projection that the latest IPC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has made says that by the turn of this century, they project that 1.6 billion refugees will be climate change refugees. Now, that is unthinkable. That's probably almost as big as the entire world population when you were born, Phil. That is something that we're going to have to cope with, and I think that will be very brutal indeed.
Just to pick up on what Nimco said, I think you're absolutely right that there are so many conflicts, wars in Africa that don't get any coverage in the Western media. I remember a few months ago we did a report on what was going on in Somalia, and I had a text from a friend saying, what on earth are you covering that for? I'm thinking, because nobody else is.
And it's a global crisis, and also these are crises that could actually be fixed in the sense that if people got around the table. But again, as I said, we're so kind of self-absorbed and self-obsessed within our kind of global south kind of conversation that we're forgetting. I think it's going to be to our detriment when the Sudan conflicts escalates, and then also with the DRC as well. So I think with the Foreign Secretary, I know he's quite busy in Gaza and Ukraine and wherever else he's off to, but I think it's a real key thing that we need to appoint a serious minister to Africa and actually do something, because the UK does have respect in the region. Well,
who is the Minister for Africa?
I have no idea.
I think right now it's Andrew Mitchell. But your point is
development and Africa. But I mean, but that's not that we need an actual focused minister, which we used to have. And I think the best minister that they ever had, which was short-lived, was Rory Stewart. So maybe we can ask him back as a special envoy to
He's
Africa.
earning far too much money doing live events.
I'm just going to support Nimco's point, but we're already feeling it. You know, I can't remember what proportion it's probably about a quarter of the goods that come from China to Europe have been disrupted because they can't go through the Red Sea because of the war in Yemen. They're having to go around.
Well, there's no war in Yemen. Yemen is attacking.
That means they're costing us more, and the things that we order are taking longer to arrive. So we're already beginning to feel the impact of what is. I mean, I know it's, for the people there, it's not a small war, but in the context, it's a very localised thing, but we are already feeling it.
If you look at the Memorandum of Understanding that's been concluded between Ethiopia and that region of Somalia that...
Somaliland, so it's not a region, it's Somaliland specifically.
Okay, this is the contentious...
But it's not contentious, and this is this is what I mean. It's Somaliland. It's an actual independent country, and that, like, you know, so Ethiopia has signed an MOU with Somaliland in order to get access to the Red Sea.
To the Red Sea, that's right.
And actually, I think it would serve the UK well in order to have a serious look at that region as well. But.
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much for your answers to Phil. We're going to move on to a subject close to Nimco's heart in just a moment. It's 8:47.
This is LBC.
Trevor Phillips, Nimco Ali, Barry Gardiner and Matt Warman here answering your questions. Let's go to Simon in Edgware. Simon, hello.
Good evening, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Right, the question actually is for Miss Ali. And first of all, Miss Ali, I admire your courage in your fight against FGM. Really, really admirable. And my question to you is, in light of only the second case that's been successfully prosecuted, a female that was sentenced to 7 years recently for taking a 3-year-old to Kenya, do you think enough is being done to address this problem through GP surgeries, schools, etc., in light of only 2 prosecutions? And the other part of my question is, do you feel enough is being done to pressure countries like Kenya, Somalia, and enough that's being done to get out into those rural areas to campaign against this awful medieval butchery?
Nimco.
So that's a two-part question. In terms of the domestic kind of nature, I think a lot has been done. We've got we've got FGM added to the Children's Act, so basically the threshold for children to be protected is not as high as it used to be. We've got referral through GPs and medical support, but I think one of the things that we need, and I've written to the Home Secretary and yet to hear from him, is the fact that we need updated on the stats of FGM. So currently we have about 132,000 women who are living in the UK who have had FGM. Most of those have come to the UK with FGM, but those stats are from 2011, so we really need to update those. So I think it's both. I think it's actually quite pressing that both the Home Secretary and the Health Secretary come together and actually have that stats updated. But that's the only way that we can have a conversation.
Have you any idea how many kids in this country, how many girls in this country are subjected to FGM each year?
So I think the rates have gone down since we've started. So since 2003, so before 2003, it wasn't illegal for you to take your child outside of the UK in order to have FGM.
It was illegal to do it here.
It was illegal to do it here. So ultimately, I had my FGM in Djibouti, and many of the girls that I grew up with in Cardiff had their FGM extraterritorially. Which is the interesting thing was that a lot of the abusers and a lot of the people who were pro FGM knew that. So I was behind a community wall for years and years, being told that these people are ignorant and they don't know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing, and I have this conversation all the time. Even when I was at the Home Office as the Violence Against Women and Girls advisor, I was consistently told by staffers, but people are ignorant. And one of the key things I said is, if ethnic communities where FGM is prevalent are able to deal with all the civilities of living in the UK, so if they can get their tax returns, if they can get their driving license, they actually know that FGM is illegal. So we spend a lot of money and a lot of time with this kind of semi-racist idea that people are ignorant and this is why they don't know FGM is illegal. That is not true. At the moment, I can't say confidently what the numbers are. I think we've done really well, but in order to get the numbers, we have to get the updated stats. And updated stats will tell you when a child was born, when they come to the UK, and whether there's evidence of FGM. So in that, we will know that since 2011, if there are any children that are born in the UK that have subsequently had FGM, then those stats will come out. So I think this is what I mean. I think there's an urgency from the Home Secretary and the Health Secretary to be able to work on this, which is something that we need in order to show whether we need to invest more or we need to be able to pat ourselves on the back. In terms of the international perspective, I think Kenya is one of the most successful countries in terms of tackling FGM. Sierra Leone hasn't got any law against it. 5 girls died recently as a result of FGM. Somalia hasn't got any FGM legislation. As a Somali, it is embarrassing for me to say that 99% of Somali women have undergone FGM. It's globally 99% of Somali women have undergone FGM. Those are the global stats, and sadly they also revert back into the UK. So most of the women who have undergone FGM that are living in the UK are Somali, but now that's rising to the Sudanese and other kind of communities. That is ultimately one of the key things that the Five Foundation is doing, is trying to get more funding to grassroots activism, because at the moment there's less than 2% that is going to those communities. But I have to say that there are incredible women on the front line in Africa that are fighting against FGM. So,
any comments from three of you on this? Because it is horrendous, this practice. And I was just thinking, if there was a male equivalent of FGM, do we not think that it would be taken a lot more seriously in the world?
Just huge respect for the work that you and Five Lives are doing, but I think what many of us find difficult to understand is how it is that people do that to their own children, and what are the cultural pressures? Can you explain to us the cultural pressures that mean that happens? Because it seems, if you've been through it, why would you inflict it on somebody else?
I think there's a deep social context within it, but ultimately it is about the fact that we've left the African continent so neglected and so underdeveloped that the main commodity that they have is the girl, it's the bride price. So FGM, ironically, is an asset. What you do is you cut your daughter and then you're able to sell her for more in terms of marriage. The key way to help to end FGM is actually economic independence and economic justice for women. I can say this as a survivor. I was 7 when I had FGM. At the age of 40, I can say that for the first time in the history of my family that there are more uncut girls and there are women who've had FGM. Ultimately, that is all to do with not just education, but also the economic choices that women have right now. So It's an issue that's been around for 4,000 years, but there is hope. So, for example, in Israel, ironically, it's one of the only places where diaspora communities have moved and within a generation have ended FGM. So the Ethiopian diaspora community in Israel have ended FGM because women were able to get jobs and access to these kind of assets and community roles. So yeah, it happens for multiple reasons, but I think even though it's done by women, I think men are the main kind of driving forces.
Right, let's fit in one more question. It's from Jim. He says, would you be a police officer? And do we have enough of them? Now, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has said today there's a deeply concerning shortfall in officer numbers in the service, suggesting public sector pay levels are part of the problem in recruiting new officers. He said the Met would be 1,400 short at the end of March, and by 2025, 2,750 short. Trevor, you live in London. How concerned are you by this?
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And the direct answer, by the way, to the question is, actually, if I were 40 years younger, it's a thing I would consider.
You would be a mere child.
Indeed, exactly. I'd been in primary school, of course. But I think that the point I wanted to make about it is, one of the reasons that people ask this question is they've got an idea of what being a cop is that dates back 50 years. Actually, if you look at the practice and the force today, it's light years from that. There are, frankly, it's not quite, but it's getting on for being a graduate profession. There are people who do really interesting things, don't just walk about the streets. If you want to know about computers, you want to know about cutting-edge investigation, forensics, it's an incredibly exciting career for a young person. And I think part of the problem is we keep representing being a cop as just a bobby with big boots.
Right, we've got very little time left, so I'm going to have to restrict you each to 30 seconds. Barry?
I've been a policeman.
Have you?
Only on the police parliamentary scheme, which meant that we spent about 20 days in the year with the police. No, we didn't arrest anyone, but it was absolutely fascinating insight into the work that the police do. Huge respect for what they go through and what they do. And I'm delighted to say that my niece is a police officer, and a highly respected and even a decorated one for her bravery. So I have huge respect for the police.
Okay, Nimco.
I think I'd be an incredible police officer, so yeah.
I think you put the fear of God in me.
I'd be a really good police officer, and I would really like to focus on community work. I think that's the key thing that police is missing at the moment, because apparently there's so few of them around.
Matt, one of your colleagues has been a special constable, hasn't he? David T.C. Davis.
Indeed. But Lincolnshire is the worst funded police force in the country. So we definitely need more of them. Boris Johnson's commitment to do another 20,000 police officers is good insofar as it goes, but fundamentally we need to look at what the job of the police force is in the 21st century. It has changed, and it should reflect that, and that does, in places like Lincolnshire, definitely need more money. So if you're in the Met, you're getting proportionally a lot more cash than you are in Lincolnshire.
Well, we're going to talk about this in the next hour, so I'd like to hear your ideas as to how you can recruit extra police officers. Our final question comes from Sharon in Welling. 2 members of McFly, they're a popular music beat combo, have been put on the judging panel for one of the many singing TV talent shows. Which talent show should you be judged for? Now, Tom Fletcher and Danny Jones are joining The Voice. That's the one which Sir Tom Jones is on. I read on my screen in front of me because I have seen it, and once was quite enough. But TV talent show, Nimco.
Britain's Got Talent, I guess.
I'd quite like to be on that one.
Yeah, because you get a variety.
I would actually give my honest views, unlike the 4 of them that are on it at the moment. Trevor.
I think, to be honest, Lord Sugar should hang up his boots. I can do that one.
You could do that. I could see you being very sort of...
I've got a couple of businesses, and the kind of dorks they have on there would not see the inside of any of our firms. I'll tell you that.
There's no reference to Baroness Brady, I'm sure. Barry.
Well, the one I'd like to be judge on is MasterChef, of course. I mean, imagine eating all those delicious meals. I mean, my wife would veto it, of course, because I'm already far too porky around the middle. But it'd be great fun.
Matt?
I'm really cross. Barry's stolen my idea. MasterChef, but in that case, in lieu of that, just because it's back, I'd really love to be one of the referees on the new Gladiators.
Oh, my God. You should be expelled from Parliament just for uttering that view. And if I was Speaker, I would never call you again for that. Not what you said earlier. Thank you all very much for joining us. That's Sir Trevor Phillips, Nimco, Ali, Barry Gardiner and Matt Warman. On Monday's panel, you will hear from the Conservative MP Anna Firth and the journalist and former teacher Tatton Spiller. Sounds like a movie actor, doesn't it? Tatton Spiller. What a great name. Right, coming up in the next hour, as I say, we're going to turn our attention to the police because the Met is facing what they call a deeply concerning shortfall in officer numbers amid recruitment struggles. Mark Rowley, the Commissioner, said that the Met would be 1,400 short at the end of March, 2,750 short in 2025. Now, there were about 5,000 fewer officers in the Met than a decade ago, he told the London Assembly today, and he wants to see a sizable change to the London waiting allowance to help attract more police officers. But is it just the money? Is it just the pay that is deterring people from applying to be police officers? Is there more to it than that? And what are your ideas for recruiting more police? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, pressures growing on the Speaker of the House over chaos in the Commons during a debate on the violence in Gaza. Sir Lindsay Hoyle's been forced to apologise for allowing a controversial change in procedure to voting. Dozens of MPs are calling for him to stand down. Labour MP and former Shadow Cabinet Minister Barry Gardiner has told Cross Question he believes the Speaker was trying to do the right thing.
The trouble is, when you think you know what people are going to do and you don't follow the rules, then sometimes you make a mistake. And I think that's what the Speaker did today.
Some MPs have accused Sir Lindsay Hoyle of being put under pressure by senior figures in Labour, which he denies. Conservative MP and former Culture Minister Matt Warman has told Iain that was inevitably going to cause trouble.
If you say the Speaker is at serious risk of allegation that he has made the Labour Party's life